Today, it's my honor to present to you the State of the School 2020. This has been a year like no other. We are in a world that is simultaneously dealing with major challenges: a pandemic, the economic disruption that it caused, reaction to recent tragedies and decades of inequality, all resulting in a shock to our system like we haven't seen. At Sinai, all effort was devoted to dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and the surge of patients associated with that, and ensuring the safety of our faculty, students, trainees. Outpatient visits and non-emergency surgery was postponed. Educational activities, including graduation, went virtual. Non-COVID research was halted. And hundreds of our employees were redeployed to help with the response of unprecedented number of patients. Additionally, the pandemic has shown a light on the disparities between different communities. There is a grassroots cry for social justice. Mount Sinai will be a national leader in carrying the torch to reduce racism. Essentially, this is an important, pivotal moment in our country's history and our history. This graph shows the number of hospitalizations in the Mount Sinai health system during the pandemic. And you can see in late March, early April, we had thousands of patients being treated in our health system. In essence, we were the epicenter of the epicenter. Thankfully, as we went into May and June, and now July, August, and September, the number of patients has dramatically reduced. Essentially, a tsunami of sick patients hit us in March and April. Over 8,000 COVID patients were treated over the 3-month period in our hospitals. Through observations and great science, the doctors and researchers redefined COVID-19 as a new disease that attacks cells in our blood vessels. We also looked at how the disease played out in each individual on their immune system and whether comorbidities such as obesity, hypertension, heart disease made the disease even worse. What was amazing was how our researchers worked side by side at the same time that we were in the middle of the pandemic to make fundamental discoveries about the role of clotting in the disease, the role of the immune system, the effect of the disease not only on the lung, but on kidneys and the brain. It really was an amazing time for all of us. And so many of our doctors and nurses and other staff showed amazing courage, and our scientists really demonstrated their brilliance during this terrible time. So now I'm going to show you a video that exemplifies what we did during that time. You all will be very proud of how Mount Sinai made such a difference, not only for our patients here, but for patients around the world.
New York's Mount Sinai Hospital.
The Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai Morningside Hospital.
Mount Sinai.
For the Mount Sinai Health System.
Mount Sinai Hospital is on the front lines of the coronavirus pandemic.
We've really turned our hospital upside down in order to create capacity to accept these COVID-positive patients.
You're fighting an enemy, so it is like a war. And we have teams of very brave people fighting that war every day, day in and day out.
You know, the workers are there, 16-hour shifts, sometimes longer.
New York State began antibody testing today, is hoping to conduct as many as 14,000 per week.
People who develop neutralizing antibody responses are going to be protected from reinfection.
You can see how it begins in this video from the lab at Mount Sinai. Inside those wells are antibodies from donors who had the virus.
The antibodies in the convalescent plasma will neutralize the viral particles in the bloodstream of that individual.
Sinai recently launched a social media campaign to help drive awareness and donations.
This is not throwing money in the ocean. This is you can target specifically what you want to do and do something that you feel good about.
Mount Sinai Health System has done really an extraordinary job sourcing supplies for us, bringing in additional ventilators.
You're using simple PAR to help convert CPAP machines into ventilators.
They constructed a protocol and a simple circuit. So when you take that little machine and you hook it up to a test lung, it inflates the lung and it works.
And we've now launched a new center for resilience, for stress, and for personal growth.
That's where recharge rooms like this one at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York come in, aimed to help staff cope with the anxiety, stress, and trauma they're facing.
People are reporting 70 to 80% reductions in their perceived level of stress.
Thank you for all you're doing and all your personnel are doing. It's extraordinary, and we all need you, so thank you.
So let me review again what was Sinai's response to the pandemic. Research, all non-COVID related research was halted. Our wet labs were shut down. So was patient-oriented clinical research. Our computational faculty worked from home. However, all COVID-19 related investigations, both basic and clinical research, stayed open, and that's where they made the major discoveries that I mentioned. The collaborations between our scientists and our clinicians provided new insights that changed the lives of our patients. In terms of education, in-person classes were canceled. All lectures went virtual. Clinical rotations were canceled. Dorm rooms were vacated as much as possible. In terms of our clinical care, outpatient visits were canceled. Only emergency cases were handled. All elective procedures were canceled. It was an unprecedented time. But we came together to meet this challenge. We were all in it together. 1,834 non-faculty employees were redeployed. 933 employees were redeployed into a different function. 51% of redeployed staff moved into a different job title. Our clinical faculty moved from the outpatient facilities into inpatient care at all levels. Over 700 student volunteers from our medical and graduate schools provided enormous support to help us take care of the patients. Residents and fellows assisted with patient care in our COVID units, including our ICUs. Postdocs helped in our clinical laboratories. Administrative staff helped with everything from stocking supplies to helping with other non-patient tasks. We identified the specific elements of the lung disease in COVID-19 patients. Using CT scans from China, physicians in our radiology department were the first in the United States to identify specific patterns in the lungs as markers of the disease. We developed what is now the gold standard of measuring antibodies to COVID-19, which will be very important as we assess the effect of vaccines to develop what we call neutralizing antibodies to combat the infection. We use convalescent plasma to help patients recover from the infection, and we showed that there were better survival rates in those who received the plasma compared with a control group. The FDA has now authorized its use to treat COVID-19, and Mount Sinai research was a major reason for that authorization. Mount Sinai researchers were among the first to show that anticoagulation therapy was associated with improved survival among COVID-19 patients. That has turned out to be a very important treatment for the patients. And researchers discovered the immune predictors of COVID-19 in cases that fare the worst. These are just some examples of the major COVID-19 research that our scientists conducted during the height of the pandemic. Amazing. Our engineers also had a major impact. We were able to use unique approaches to develop ventilators. Teams of clinicians and engineers, as well as external vendors, worked together at Mount Sinai to develop novel solutions that were granted emergency use authorization, and some have now been approved for medical use. I've already mentioned some of the terrific discoveries made by Mount Sinai scientists, and this slide illustrates the publications in major journals that have already come out related to that science. We have also developed new centers and institutes to assist in our understanding of the COVID-19 virus. We established a COVID-19 Informatics Center to translate and unify all the clinical data in the Mount Sinai Health System into actionable information. We've established a center for post-COVID care, and the goal of this center is to provide multidisciplinary care for patients who have longer-term consequences of the COVID-19 infection, but also to develop a registry of thousands of patients that we have treated to follow them. And we believe that this registry will provide information not only to our own health system, but the nation and the world about specifically what is the long-term outcome of the COVID-19 infection and what kind of treatment is going to be critical. We conducted a survey that looked at the emotional impact to our frontline workers of treating patients who were very sick with the COVID-19 infection. And as many of you know, visitors were not allowed, and so that our clinicians, our doctors, our nurses, respiratory therapists, and others not only had to play the major role in treating the patient, but had to provide emotional support. And that turned out to be very stressful, not surprisingly, to our clinicians. So we've established a center for stress, resilience, and personal growth. And our motto is, we take care of our own. This center will be a hub to provide free assessments and treatment for Mount Sinai clinicians who are suffering from residual emotional effects, literally of the heroism and bravery that they demonstrated in treating patients with the COVID-19 infection. So the goal now is to get back to a new normal and to do that safely. And as many of you know, we've established universal mask mandates, symptom checks for people coming for care, as well as visitors, that we follow social distancing. We've limited numbers in meetings, enhanced cleaning, and so forth. And so far, that's been very effective in terms of very few infections among our staff and clinicians, and it's been very safe for patients to come back to care here, both inpatient and outpatient. We're dealing with other crises, not only the pandemic, but issues related to social justice and equity in healthcare. It turns out, and we're one of the places that have established this, that COVID-19 has affected minority communities more seriously than others. And systemic racism has been identified that may relate to the challenges in the Black communities in dealing with the COVID-19 infection. And this may relate to access to health care, comorbidities with poor outcome, and housing and environmental conditions. So we are working very hard to help the underserved and minority communities to deal with these problems. It's a major priority in our part. And what are we doing to understand the impact of systemic racism? We have established a Mount Sinai Health System task force to address racism, to provide a roadmap for us to do even better in this regard. We've established the Mount Sinai Laureates Program to enhance our recruitment of faculty, both basic and clinical researchers from Black and Latin backgrounds to join Mount Sinai. And we're providing funds to make sure we can literally recruit the best and the brightest from those communities. And we've established a Health Equity Research Institute to better understand the effects of COVID-19 affecting at-risk communities, including those that are non-white, low-income, immigrant, uninsured. This is very important to all of us. Our medical education department has a racism and bias initiative. These efforts were initiated by David Muller, our Dean of Medical Education. And you can see on this slide all the efforts that have been initiated that relate to racism and bias. So let me now move to the usual metrics that we discuss based on the state of the school. And that is research, education, and clinical care, our major missions. Despite dealing with the pandemic, it was really a great year for research. In fact, I've already described the amazing research done in the middle of the pandemic. Our NIH funding is more than it ever has been. At this point, it's over $406 million, and our rank among research dollars per investigator is among the very best in the United States. And some of our faculty have received awards that represent the outstanding quality of their science. And just to mention two, Miriam Murad was inducted into the National Academy of Sciences, and Brian Brown received the Director's Transformative Research Award. These are just two examples. Many new appointments at the School of Medicine at the level of Dean, Senior Associate Dean and Associate Dean, and Chair and Institute Director. The momentum is still going forward in terms of promoting our best and recruiting the best. And this slide shows other important appointments at the school. So how are we doing in terms of education? As we do every year, we think we've recruited the best ever at the school. And I'll say that again. If you look at the quality of the students that we've recruited to Mount Sinai, this slide illustrates the MD students, the MD PhD students, and students that have been admitted through our special program, the FlexMed program. The metrics are, spectacular. Mean GPAs over 3.85. And you can see that students came from all over the country, from over 60 undergraduate schools in our medical school class, and so on and so forth. So we're very happy of the students that are coming to join us this year. This next slide summarizes all the major initiatives that are going to take place in 2021, and they relate to almost every aspect of what we care about in terms of medical education. And we're also dealing with issues related to the pandemic. And so, for example, our first and second year students are learning remotely in the first semester, and many of them are living off campus, many at home, to make sure that they stay safe. Our third and fourth year medical students are doing their normal rotations. Because traveling around the country to interview for residency programs is difficult, our fourth year students were offered early assistance programs into Mount Sinai residency programs. In other words, to stay here, and over 50 fourth year students decided to do that. That's good for them, and that's good for us. Our residency programs remain highly regarded, and this slide indicates their U.S. Reputational rank. Even though these rankings are very good, I don't think they reflect how outstanding our training programs are. We're better than these numbers. In terms of graduate medical education, we remain the largest sponsor of graduate medical education in the United States, with over 2,500 residents and fellows in 240 programs in our health system. So we take care of the future of medicine. As you can see, we have several new accredited programs, for 2020. We've dealt with the issues of the pandemic to make sure our residents and fellows remain safe. There's a careful focus on monitoring them in terms of any exposure to the infection. We've offered progressive leave policies to the residents and fellows to allow them more flexibility. So what about the graduate school? Also did great. If you look at the PhD class that is illustrated on this slide, very large class. It's the largest class that I think we've ever had. 79% of the class are women, come from underrepresented groups in science. 51 come from different undergraduate schools. So we have 53 students coming in and 51 from different schools. So there's a lot of diversity in terms of the colleges that they come from. And look at the GPA, 3.81, by far the best ever. So we got a great group of PhD students coming in. And the number of master's students is the largest we've ever had. And so individuals that are looking to get masters are seeing Mount Sinai as a place to come. This slide illustrates some of the notable accomplishments in the graduate school, some of which I've already mentioned. And this next slide illustrates some of the initiatives that are planned for 2021, most notably a new PhD concentration in AI for medicine, augmented intelligence for medicine. But you can see that we have a number of other very important initiatives for the graduate school. Several years ago, I established an Office of Wellbeing and Resilience. It was very important during the time of the pandemic, but it's been very important, to the emotional well-being of our students, our faculty, and so forth in general, to reduce the impact of burnout, which has been a big problem in American medicine. And you can see here all the accomplishments of that office in the past year. It's really been a phenomenal success, and John Ripp and his team deserve congratulations. The Office of Academic Development and Enrichment is undergoing a change this year. Elizabeth Howell, unfortunately, has left Mount Sinai to become the chair of OBGYN at Penn. And after a decade of leading this office, Lakshmi Devi is stepping down. And so we offer, thanks for a decade of service and developing wonderful programs related to academic development and enrichment. And what we are doing now is to move what they have been doing, and now we're calling it an Office for Faculty Development, under the Office for Wellbeing and Resilience, and it's now going to be led by Lauren Pecorello. And so we think by putting together the work that we're doing around wellbeing and resilience with faculty development, it'll be a terrific program under one roof. Never has the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, led by Gary Butts, been more important. As we've talked about, issues related to social justice and disparities in care are a very important initiative for Mount Sinai. And this slide illustrates just some of the accomplishments of that office, the ODI. And this next slide highlights what the initiatives for 2021 are going to be. I also mentioned the work we're doing as it relates to gender equity. And that is housed under the Office of Gender Equity in Science and Medicine, led by Carol Horowitz, the Dean for Gender Equity. Some of the accomplishments of that office, this slide, as does the next slide. And as I mentioned before, we established a new institute for health equity research. Very important initiative for us. And this slide illustrates the function and how this institute is organized. The director is Carol Horowitz, and the co-director is Lynn Richardson. This next slide illustrates the current projects associated with that institute. Let's talk about our NIH funding, which, as you know, is a marker of success of our research programs. This slide illustrates how our NIH funding has gone up every year since 2011, and 2020 is not an exception here. And you can see how our basic science departments are all in the top 10 in the country, and our clinical departments are doing very well also. This slide illustrates some of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I've already discussed with you. In terms of 2021 initiatives in research, they include expanding our research in cardiovascular disease, elevating the Center for Cardiovascular Research to an institute. We are recruiting new leadership for that institute, a new chair in genetics and genomic sciences, and we've just successfully recruited Thomas Fuchs to lead our institute focused on artificial intelligence in healthcare. That is the Hasso-Plattner Institute at Mount Sinai. We need to expand our space devoted to research. We're going to have a new innovation hub, around 75,000 square feet of new wet labs on the west side with close proximity to Mount Sinai West. This new space will focus on innovation and discovery. As you all know, a metric that we hold ourselves to in terms of the impact of our science is, did the science change the lives of our patients? Mount Sinai Innovation Partners, our tech transfer office, helps that happen. And here are the metrics associated with the translation of Mount Sinai science toward helping our patients. It lists all the faculty engagements, the new licenses, all our technology disclosures. Very, very productive year. The next slide illustrates the impact of the COVID-19 research. We entered over 35 licenses for COVID-related technologies. We founded a new company called Cantera Biosciences, a Mount Sinai venture to develop and commercialize our COVID-19 antibody test. There have been other notable commercial achievements by Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. For example, Renalytics AI, a startup co-founded by Mount Sinai, is commercializing diagnostic prognostic tools for kidney disease, and recently raised $85 million in a NASDAQ listing. We formed Trellis Health, a Mount Sinai company using digital health platform to deal with chronic diseases, and so on and so forth. And this slide lists other notable achievements that have been accomplished this year. So what about our clinical programs? This has been a challenging year in terms of the pandemic because for several months we had to close down our faculty practice. And so this slide illustrates the timeline of what's happened so far this year. Very busy January and February. March to June, basically shut down our ambulatory programs, had to redeploy over 2,000 faculty and staff. And now we have developed protocols, for patients to return to our clinics safely, and we're about 80 to 90% prior levels. So we're making progress. This slide shows the monthly volumes in terms of in-person visits and telehealth visits. You can see the dip in March, April, and May, the recovery in June and July. This next slide shows 2020 highlights related to our faculty practice. We also had some leadership changes. Matt Rosamond started as our Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer in January. Kelly Casano has been promoted to Senior Vice President, and other leadership changes have also been occurring. And this next slide illustrates new initiatives for 2021. Not only has it returned to normal, but also to expand the faculty practice throughout our health system. So what about financial results? When you shut down the faculty practice, when you become COVID hospitals for a number of months, you shut down your research labs, you can imagine that there were financial consequences. But we are rebounding rapidly. We expect positive results by November, and research has recovered dramatically, as I showed you. We're going to have more NI research funding than ever before, well, more than 2019. The faculty practice is recovering. So when you put that all together, our financial situation is getting a lot better. This next slide illustrates our financial goals and policies. Look at this carefully. We're now in budget season, and so these are our goals for 2021. This next slide, like we do every year, illustrates some of the challenges in terms of our finances and our action plans to deal with those challenges. And this next slide lists our financial improvement initiatives for 2021. The philanthropy is very important. It was particularly important during the height of the pandemic, led by Rich Friedman, co-chair of our board. Over those few months of the height of the pandemic, we raised over $70 million. Half for the hospital system, half for the school. And those funds enabled the research that I reviewed with you to happen in such a rapid fashion. And we are now, reactivating our capital campaign with a goal of $2 billion. We've currently raised about $860 million thus far. So we're back in business in terms of our capital campaign. Looking forward, this pandemic will end. Life will return to normal. The economy will rebound. Sinai is at the forefront of cutting-edge research and treatment for COVID-19. Together, we must imagine a world as it should be and actively engage to achieve it by addressing the disparities in access to opportunities and health care. At Sinai, as it has been for many years, our innovation and creativity is already showing the way. Sinai's exceptional faculty and students and staff have always found ways to adapt and continue to excel in all our missions. Resilience is in our DNA. I am proud to be your dean. Thank you very much.